Hey there, berries, welcome to my support tier list for patch 11.2 coming out in the 21st of January. So this is for that 21st of January 2021 patch. There was a lot of changes in the previous patch, and this patch is no exception. We've got a few champion changes here coming to Soraka and Senna. Got a few AD carry changes which might affect some support picks. We've got an Imperial Mandate nerf. We've got a Shurilia's item change in terms of stat revamp. We've got tank buffs for support, I would say, like item buffs in terms of Sunfire, Chem Tank, Gargle Stoneplate, and Frostfire Gauntlet. So there's a lot of things to cover in this one. There aren't too many support changes overall, though. Maokai support is getting nerfed specifically, but those are the highlights already at the start, ready for you. If you do have any questions about this tier list coming up, then I would recommend the best place, if this video is longer than a couple of days old, come over to twitch.tv/Bizzleberry, and I'm live pretty much every day. And if I'm live, feel free to ask me a league question, even if I'm playing other stuff like Age of Empires. Or you can join the Discord, discord.gg/Bizzleberry. Make sure you're verified, and then you'll have access to the entire channel, and you're more than welcome to ask me or anyone else support questions in there. So without further ado, let's move on into the tier list. Not much usually happens in this tier list in terms of like the first couple of tiers. So tier 5 and tier 4 are generally the same. Tier 5 behind my head is Teemo and Nico. I generally don't recommend you play these champions at all. The only extreme situations would be if you're coming in from a lane, like a top lane or a mid lane, and you wanting to learn the support role, then you can then start looking at these type of champions, but I wouldn't recommend any of these at the moment. Going into the tier 4, I did move Zareth down from tier 3 to tier 4. I just feel like he's falling off, and the same with Vel'Koz. Other than that, I don't think there's too many dramatic changes in regarding to tier 4. Oh, I did move Ral up from tier 4 to tier 3, which we'll talk about very shortly. And I did move Gragas up from tier 4 to tier 3. Those are primarily because of the tank support buffs coming through, but I think we can just just skip ahead over to tier 3, and then we can talk about some of the more interesting changes coming into this patch. So tier 3, we've got Brand, Rakan, Rel, Swain, Soraka, Pyke, Gragas, Zillion, Nautilus. Maokai is still on tier 3, and so is the Soraka, by the way, and Brom. So Soraka is getting a little buff on her W. From the first point, you're going to get, I believe, 10 extra healing, and then later on your Q, you're going to get more of that rejuvenation buff. When you land a Q on someone, you get more healing. The problem I have in terms of like Soraka specifically is, yes, there's more grievous wounds going around. Yes, these extra things are buffs, but they're not anywhere near enough of what Soraka actually needs. So the Q buffs are only like later on into the game. You're going to be doing like 2 or 3 points in Q, but you're not going to want to max it. So it's like super ultra late game, level 17, level 18. You're going to start seeing those buffs on Soraka, which is a bit lame, if I'm going to be blunt. So you'll notice a slight buff, I guess, in a rejuvenation buff on the second and third point in Q, ever so slight and minor. But you're going to be wanting to, max your W, and then you're going to want to max your E because of the silence cooldown. And the silence cooldown becomes more valuable once those team fights start happening. So yeah, it's not really a huge buff for Soraka. We'll see how she does. I'm sure her win rate will go up ever so slightly, but it's like nothing. It's not going to be anything crazy. The other champion that got changed this patch directly in this tier is Maokai. Maokai received a sapling nerf on his E. I believe it was a 1% down to 0.8%, and some sort of like mana cost increase, I believe, to that effect. And then also he's got the Imperial Mandate nerf, which is if you're not familiar with that change, it will now, the cooldown on Imperial Mandate per champion target will now happen once you apply the initial debuff on the target, as opposed to when an ally champion procs it. So overall it's going to be a little bit less damage being applied, and I think what was happening with Maokai sapling stacking in a brush, it would proc it multiple times before, like say if you've got 3 saplings there, I think it would proc 3 times before an ally comes across and helps. So champions that apply lots of like micro instances of slows and things in different sources of abilities, so like Maokai is probably the best example of that, like 3 saplings in a brush is going to prevent that. So yeah, and also it's to try and nerf solo lanes from taking the Imperial Mandate as much as well, so it's going to be definitely purely a support thing. Imperial Mandate in terms of like general supports like Nami for example, it's not, you're not going to really notice any change at all. Maybe like some ever so slight minor nerf, but it's like nothing crazy compared to something like the Maokai saplings. But I think he's still going to be annoying for particular if you're in like gold minus. I did a game actually here with him yesterday on 11.1 in ranked in Diamond 3 and won it. It won't be going up onto YouTube unfortunately, because I did a kind of like a live streaming exclusive thing in there where I was just chilling with the chat. But yeah, Maokai is okay to play right now. Nothing particularly special, and this nerf is obviously going to hit him a little bit. So Rakan and Rel in this list. Gragas, you could probably argue the same with Nautilus. They're technically getting buffed this patch. Chem Tank and the Frostfire Gauntlet and the Sunfire are getting changed stat-wise. And let me just, there's a lot of different changes here, so I'm just going to pull up my official Rito patch notes that they gave me. We have a lot of changes coming through. So we have cost reduction across the board on all support tank items. So I can show you these official notes because why not? If it's going to let me. So here we have the tank mythic changes. So Sunfire Aegis is going to be losing the ability haste, and it's going to be converted into tenacity and slow resistance. So in my opinion, this is actually like one of the ones that's actually a nerf. I wouldn't ever recommend taking Sunfire Aegis on a tank support anyway. I know some people took it on stuff like Leona, but I wouldn't recommend it anyway. And honestly, this kind of like is a nerf. I would rather have cooldown reduction on Leona than tenacity, just to have your Q off a little bit more often. So overall, I think this item got nerfed. Even though they're just saying it's just got a stat revamp. Frostfire Gauntlet as an item, I haven't yet experimented with it properly. It's losing 25 armor, but it's gaining 5 haste. The actual area of effect on the ground from Frostfire, I'm not entirely sure it's worth it on a support. It might be better for a solo laner. So I think this is more of a solo laner change. But the main one I really wanted to focus on is the Turbo Chem Tank. So it's going to be 400 gold cheaper. You're losing 25 magic resist, which honestly isn't really that bad. To save the extra 400 gold, I think that's absolutely like fine. I'd say like AD, like having to build armor is more be more of a factor in solo queue these days as opposed to magic resistance. You get an extra 5% haste, plus the mythic passive is going from tenacity to 5 haste. So if you're not familiar with Turbo Chem Tank, if you pop it just before you engage, you're going to get that burst of movement speed towards enemy champions. So it's going to help you engage a lot easier on some champions, like Gragas. Like sometimes he would go Predator, but this gives him an option of not going Predator. You know, you have the Nautilus that can get in a little bit easier. Blitzcrank. I mean, Leona technically you could still do this with. And you know, some like what else did we have? Like Rakan, I think it could be a really big factor in terms of Turbo Chem Tank. I think it might end up being like mandatory. You could be making an argument for Shirley's, and Shirley's is having a stat change as well. So you've got a lot of interesting things happening here, but I think this particular with the mythic passive being changed to ability haste makes it so that is actually a pretty nice support tank item. So now you've got two options between the Locket and now the Turbochem tank, which I'm pretty excited about, because honestly every tank like was basically building Locket and the other options were pretty bad. So Turbochem tank on tank supports, get ready for that potential change. So you've got more options now. I don't believe there was anything else. ARAM balance changes. Yeah, I don't think we're going to be dipping into that. So yeah, that covers it. Like Rel, I've moved up from tier 4 to tier 3. I know she's getting played more in pro play. I personally don't like playing her, but I think her kit has huge potential. But now with the Turbochem tank being changed, I think she's going to get slightly higher win ratios. Still need to wait and kind of see how she does in the 11.2, and honestly how some of the other tanks do with the chem tank changes. But yeah, Rel in the 11.2 and some of the other tank supports look much more interesting now, because honestly in solo queue, enchanters and in the occasional mage was much more lucrative to do. And talking about the enchanters and stuff like that, we're going up into tier 2, where we have Senna that received a massive buff this patch. Lulu has been moved down from tier 1 to tier 2. Blitzcrank, Morgana, Sona, Seraphine, Alistair that's been moved up from tier 3 to tier 2. Bard that's been moved up from tier 3 to tier 2. And Lux has been moved down from tier 1 to tier 2. So, quite a few changes. A lot of revamping going on there. A lot of actually champion shifts between the tier 4 and tier 1. Actually, there's been a lot of little movements between up and down one tier. I don't think I've dramatically moved someone up like 2 tiers up. But the one contender that could have potentially been hitting that for a 2-tier jump is the Senna changes. Now these Senna changes, there's a lot going on there again as well. I'll try and remember them all without having to look at the patch notes. So you've got +5 gold per soul. So you're going from, I believe, 3 per soul, if I remember that correctly, to 8. So every soul you get 8 gold. You're gonna have better attack speed as a passively given to you. You're gonna have better healing ratios, AP and AD wise, on your Q. And I believe, I'm gonna have to check, I believe they buffed the the flat on that as well. Usually I remembering all of them, but there's so many changes this patch. So no, there was no passive. So it's flat, huge AP ratio gain, but also 10% AD. So like this isn't enough then to offset saying there's no point in like going AP center still, because the AD ratio got buffed as well. If this was something like 80% AP and maybe like 40 to 50% AD, then you could maybe start looking at AP center. But in her current state like this, AD is going to be way better than AP still. There was a Kraken Slayer buff there as well. I don't know if anyone's going to be doing Kraken Slayer center, but could be an interesting look into it. Oh yes, and it also increased the drop rate of souls as well from 22% to 28%. So if you're not last hitting minions, you're going to be getting souls roughly an extra 20% of the time. I don't know how that maths is there. Hope it's close, but you're getting about 20% more souls, and you're getting 5 more gold per of those souls as well. So you're going to be generating a good chunk of extra passive income for free, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so Senna's looking really good. Honestly, I think she's now a potential option. Honestly, like I will probably be looking to pick Senna whenever there's not a hard engage tank. I think you're going to have a lot of troubles against like Leona and Nautus and things like that if you're playing Senna, especially now with the chem tank changes. They'll be running at you a little bit faster. But if you're not up against that, if you're up against like the enchanter kind of meta that's happening, like, you know, the Sona, the Seraphine, even the Bard, and Morgana, if you can dodge the bindings, and Lulu, you should be like out trading, like, and doing really well. And then there's a couple of enchanters in the tier 1 that you should be doing quite well against as well. It's more like the Blitzcranks and the Alistairs that you're going to have to be really worried about. So you wouldn't ever be able to first pick Senna, but you could then play her if you know you're not up against a tank. That's my recommendation for her. And I think honestly she's going to be really strong. So yeah, I think it's like if there's a good potential argument here to put her in tier 1, but I didn't want to make that leap just yet. I mean, 11.3, if nothing changes on her, then you could make the argument for probably maybe a tier 1, but I just wanted to see how she did in this patch. I didn't feel too comfortable jumping her up straight into like their kind of god tier area at the moment. So Lulu I put down from tier 1 to tier 2. I've just genuinely felt like she is slipping away. I feel like she's a decent in lane, but it's like you have to rely on your AD carry doing well a lot, which is a risk. Her roaming potential isn't great. Maybe if you've got something like a Kindred jungle or like a Lucian mid, maybe you can maybe get away with playing like a Lulu. But if you've got no other AD potential on your team, then the W haste becomes quite rubbish, honestly. But you know, if you can trust your AD carry, then honestly Lulu can be very, very, very strong, but also at the same time very, very bad. I'm going to briefly mention Yumi. Yumi's like in tier 1 now. The difference between like Lulu and Yumi is like Yumi can buff her AD carry, but she's also really useful on assassins, like attaching to assassins. And that's why Yumi, in my opinion, is stronger than Lulu, is because you have more options outside of that laning phase rather than just having to focus on your AD carry. Now, Yumi has the AD carry option and other options to just enhance and buff, whereas Lulu's kind of just stuck into like the marksman kind of area, which in solo queue, if you're duo, then that's fine playing Lulu, but if you're solo queue, then it can be very kind of coin flip at times. Don't want to hamper on too much, as we've mentioned some of these champions before in the previous tier list. We did move Bard up from tier 3 to tier 2. I feel like his gameplay potential is always there. I believe, you know, there's been some different builds here and there. You got Guardian, kind of like a Bard build, but I think people are going to be maybe leaning a bit more towards Shrillias as opposed to the Imperial Mandate Bard. I think they'll give you some extra utility, and Bard can use the AP there quite nicely. You could maybe make an argument for Chem Tank Bard, but I don't think many people or any people will do it. But Bard's always got lots of different options to him, so yeah. And Alistair got buffed from tier 3 to tier 2, as I think he's probably going to be one of the best uses of Chem Tank in terms of wanting to roam around the map. So if you've been seeing Alistair a lot, expect to see him a little bit more often now. So yeah, just be careful of him. And now we'll be moving up into tier 1. So we've got a few champions there still. I think the overall balance of the tier 1 is generally the same across the board, apart from maybe Leona being like, now that there's more tank buffs in terms of item selections, Leona is probably the strongest pick here now in tier 1. But I think all of these champions perform really well in solo queue. Zyra is the best mage at the moment. Leona is the best tank by far at the moment. Janna is a really good tilting solo queue champion to play against. Like, she does decent damage in lane and she can disengage. I think Janna will probably see more gameplay now because of the tank buff. So, you know, she can disengage from the Alistair and potentially the Leona pre-level 6 and, you know, a couple of other things there. So potentially see more Jannas in your games as well because of the tank buffs. Thresh, I still think he's pretty damn good. Like, you know, you got the hook engage and you got disengage potential with your lantern. Nothing really else special to talk about there, apart from the fact that if you're in maybe silver minus, you're going to have people not clicking lantern, which will then effectively make your Thresh like worse. But in general, Thresh is a really good pick, especially gold plus. Nami will still use the Imperial Mandate at great, you know, should better utilize that a lot more than any of the other mythic items. I would still highly recommend Imperial Mandate Nami. Karma got moved up from tier 2 to tier 1, and so did Yumi. Yumi we briefly talked about in terms of like you have the potential to go on anyone. Moonstone buffs that came through are, you know, really solid. Been lately doing the cooldown focused Karma build that I've, you know, made a couple of videos on now. I think one of them went up onto YouTube on the Tuesday. So it's not exactly the same build as one or two other content creators use. I like going into like the Ultimate Hunter to get the mantra cooldown lower. I think some of the cooldown reduction, going into full like only cooldown reduction focused on karma, I believe is potentially a mistake because it's too expensive to what you're looking for. I think you can easily have like, you know, the Moonstone and cooldown reduction boots depending on team composition. Wouldn't always go, cooldown reduction boots are a really nice item anyway, like full stop, but like sometimes if you're up against 4 ADs or a massive amount of crowd control, you're going to need to go into the steel plates or the Magi, not the Magi's, or the Merc Treads to help, you know, get out of those situations a little bit easier. And then, you know, the Redemption is a fine item for cooldown reduction. Redemption is really nice. Staff of Flowing Water is really nice, but it won't provide you any cooldown reduction. And then you've got like the World's Oyster at that point. Wardstone is really nice on some of these enchanters in particular. Wardstone gives you a lot of cooldown reduction. If you can get that item to full completion at level 13, 2,300 gold, if you can just dump it in straight away, 40% ability haste plus the movement speed is actually, like, I think people underestimate that power a lot. I've been picking up Wardstone a bit, like during preseason and stuff, but people always kind of questioned why. And honestly, the more and more like I'm picking it up, regardless of the extra ward placements and things, I think the 40%, well, not 40%, 40 ability haste is bonkers, and for the price point that you're getting it for only 2,300 gold, I think is really, really underestimated. So Wardstone is my you know, my highest recommendation on enchanters in particular. But yeah, the Wardstone, incorporate that into karma ideally as quickly as possible, and it should feel really nice. You'll be able to get decent rotations on your abilities, but then you could say the same, you know, for like a Nami as well. Nami, I mean, I've mentioned, for example, like Nami, Janna in particular, I would generally go Imperial Mandate, but doing like a Moonstone and similar kind of cooldown reduction build, like with the Seraphine and Sona, you would probably be doing like the cooldown reduction kind of like push as well, and the Lulu, like getting to around about 45 to 50% cooldown reduction, being able to do a ridiculous amount of spell rotations on enchanters, you know, it's generally pretty good. So, you know, generally, like particularly shields, like the Lulu shields, the Karma shields, and the was gonna say like Janna shields are alright. Like generally shields from enchanters have pretty nice base values, so being able to spam them more often as opposed to having a bit of extra AP to buff the actual shield is sometimes better, particularly if the fights are lasting longer as well. Yeah, so cooldown reduction, underrated. Make sure you look at taking them on your enchanters. But other than that, I hope this has helped you improve your game in ranked in particular. For 11.2, if you do have any questions, like I mentioned at the start, I would highly recommend you join the live stream or the Discord, like twitch.tv/Bizzleberry. I'm live every day, generally EU times, but you know, there might be a late night stream, and if you're from America and stuff, I should be able to see you at some point. And yeah, I'm always happy to take questions and suggestions, even if you feel like it's been asked a million times. It's literally my job to help you and answer your questions and your needs, and push you in the right direction in solo queue. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, whatever you're up to, whether it's solo queue or not. And yeah, good luck on the climb. Take care and stay very awesome.